It's a strange thing to think about. We are here. We are the only humans left. But for most of our history, that wasn't true. Our ancestors lived alongside other kinds of humans. Other hominins, they walked the earth, hunted, made tools, maybe even dreamed and loved, just like we do. And then, they were gone. All of them. Except us. It's a huge question why that happened. And there's no easy answer. It wasn't one big thing. It was probably a mix of many small things, little edges that added up over thousands of years. Think about our family tree. It's not a straight line. It's more like a bush with lots of branches. Some branches grew long, some broke off early, or just one twig that kept going. For a long time, back millions of years ago, there were many different ape-like creatures, some of them starting to walk upright. Then came the first creatures we might call human-like, our earliest ancestors. Things like Homo habilis, the handy man, who made simple stone tools. They were not alone either. Other species, like Paranthropus, lived at the same time, eating different things, living different lives. They eventually died out. Maybe their diet was too specialized. Maybe they couldn't adapt to changing climates. We don't really know the full story for many of them. Then, around 2 million years ago, a really important species came along, Homo erectus. These guys were pioneers. They were the first to really leave Africa in big numbers. They spread all over Asia, even to Europe. They were tall, strong, and smart. They made more sophisticated stone tools, like hand axes. They likely knew how to control fire. That's a huge deal. Fire meant warmth, protection from predators, and cooking food. Cooked food means more calories, easier digestion, and more energy for a bigger brain. Homo erectus was incredibly successful. They lasted for more than 1 million years, maybe even close to 2 million years. Think about that. We, Homo sapiens, have only been around for about 300,000 years. Homo erectus was around for ages, but even Homo erectus eventually faded. Why? It's hard to say definitively. The world kept changing, climate shifted, maybe they were outcompeted by newer, even smarter hominins that evolved from them or alongside them. Maybe their tools, while good, weren't good enough for every new challenge. Eventually, different populations of Homo erectus either died out or evolved into new species in different parts of the world. Some scientists think that some populations of Homo erectus in Asia might have even survived until relatively recently, perhaps living alongside early Homo sapiens in some places. It's a messy, complex picture. Now let's fast forward a bit to a time closer to our own story. About 300,000 years ago, our own species, Homo sapiens, started to emerge in Africa. We weren't alone then either, not by a long shot. In Europe and parts of Asia, there were the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. In other parts of Asia, there were the Denisovans, and in more isolated places, there were even stranger human relatives, like Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Indonesia, and Homo naledi in South Africa. We shared the planet with all these different kinds of humans for a long time. For tens of thousands of years. Let's talk about the Neanderthals first. They are probably the most famous of our extinct relatives, and the most misunderstood. People used to think of them as dumb, brutish cavemen. But that's not true. Neanderthals were incredibly strong, stronger than us. They had bigger brains on average than we do. They were very well adapted to the cold, harsh climates of Ice Age Europe and Asia. They were expert hunters, taking down huge animals like mammoths and woolly rhinos. They made sophisticated tools, though perhaps not as diverse as ours. They buried their dead, which suggests they had some kind of ritual or belief system. They cared for their sick and injured. We have found Neanderthal skeletons with healed, broken bones, showing that others must have looked after them when they couldn't hunt for themselves. They even used pigments and jewelry, showing a glimmer of symbolic thought. They were smart, capable, and successful in their environment for hundreds of thousands of years. So if Neanderthals were so successful, why aren't they here? And why are we? This is where the theories really start. One big idea centers on cognition and language. Maybe we had a slightly different kind of brain, not necessarily bigger, but perhaps wired differently. We might have had a more advanced capacity for abstract thought, for complex language. That language is powerful. It allows us to share complex ideas, plan ahead, teach future generations more efficiently. It builds culture. It lets us tell stories, create myths, and connect in ways that might have been beyond what Neanderthals could do. Think about planning. Neanderthals were good at short-term planning. They could hunt a mammoth. But perhaps we could plan more steps ahead. We could envision different scenarios, adapt strategies on the fly. We could maybe coordinate larger groups for complex tasks, like a big game hunt or building a more elaborate shelter. We could come up with backup plans when things went wrong. This kind of advanced planning, paired with complex language, would have given us a huge advantage in a world that was constantly changing. Then there's the idea of symbolic thought and innovation. We started making art, jewelry, and carvings much earlier and more frequently than Neanderthals did. We painted on cave walls, we made small sculptures. This isn't just decoration, it's evidence of symbolic thought. It means we could represent ideas, concepts, and beliefs. This kind of thinking is also linked to innovation. We weren't just making the same tools for thousands of years. We were constantly refining them, inventing new ones, adapting them for different purposes. We started making blade tools, which were more efficient than the flakes Neanderthals mostly used. We started hafting tools, attaching stone points to spears, making projectile weapons that could be thrown from a distance. That's a huge safety advantage over close quarters hunting. We made tools out of bone, antler, and shell, not just stone. This diversification meant we could exploit more resources and adapt to more environments. Neanderthal tools, while good, didn't show the same level of rapid innovation or diversity over time. Another major factor might have been social networks and cooperation. We seem to have had much larger social networks. We traded goods like obsidian or shells over long distances. This means we had connections with groups far away. Larger networks mean more resilience. If one group struggled, they could get help from others. It means more ideas could be shared and spread. More people meant more potential innovators. It's like having a bigger brain trust. Neanderthal groups seem to have been smaller and more isolated. While they cared for their own, their social circle might not have extended as far. A larger, more interconnected Homo sapiens population could share resources, knowledge, and even genetic diversity, making them more robust against environmental pressures or disease. And that brings us to demographics and population size. Even a small advantage in birth rates or survival rates can add up over thousands of years. If Homo sapiens had slightly more children who survived to adulthood, or if our groups were slightly larger on average, that would be a powerful force. Imagine a slight difference in mortality rates, maybe because our tools and strategies led to fewer hunting accidents, or our wider networks helped us survive lean times. Over generations, our population would grow faster and become larger than that of the Neanderthals. A larger population is more resilient, it's harder for a disease to wipe out. It has more people to innovate and pass on knowledge. Even if we weren't smarter, in an individual sense, having more of us might have been enough. Then there's the dietary breadth. Neanderthals were very good hunters of large game. Their diet was heavily meat-based. This is great when there's plenty of large game. But what happens when the climate changes and the big animals migrate or die off? If your diet is specialized, you're in trouble. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were generalists. We ate everything. We fished. We hunted small game like birds and rabbits. We gathered a huge variety of plants, roots, and berries. We even ate shellfish. This broad diet meant we were incredibly flexible. If one food source disappeared, we could switch to another. We could adapt to almost any environment, from the cold tundras to deserts to coasts. This flexibility was a massive advantage, especially during periods of intense climate change. And climate change was a constant. The Ice Age was not one long, stable cold period. It was full of dramatic shifts, rapid warming, and cooling cycles. These shifts would have put immense pressure on all human populations. A specialist species like the Neanderthals might have struggled more when their preferred prey or environment changed quickly. A generalist species like Homo sapiens with a diverse diet and adaptable culture might have been better equipped to weather these storms. Our ability to cope with unpredictability might have been a key differentiator. We also have to consider geographic origin and spread. Homo sapiens originated in Africa, where Africa is a huge, diverse continent with many different environments. This might have fostered a certain kind of adaptability and resilience in our species from the start. We weren't confined to a specific niche. When we eventually started migrating out of Africa in larger waves, we were already a very adaptable species. We moved faster, spread wider, and colonized more diverse environments than any previous hominin. This rapid expansion meant we were simply present in more places, increasing our chances of survival and encounters with other groups. And speaking of encounters, what about interbreeding? This is where the story gets even more complex. We didn't just replace Neanderthals and Denisovans, we interbred with them. Most people of non-African descent today have about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genome. Some people from Asia and Oceania have even more Denisovan DNA. This means that when Homo sapiens encountered these other groups, there wasn't always conflict. Sometimes they had children together. This is a fascinating twist. It means some of their genes live on in us. Did this interbreeding help us? It's possible. Some of the genes we got from Neanderthals might have given us advantages. For example, some Neanderthal genes are linked to our immune system, helping us fight off diseases that were common in Europe and Asia. Other genes might have helped us adapt to cold climates or higher altitudes. So, while Neanderthals as a distinct group went extinct, they contributed to our survival and evolution. It wasn't a clean sweep, it was a complex process of interaction, absorption, and eventually replacement of distinct populations. It's also important to remember that it probably wasn't a sudden, violent takeover. While there might have been occasional conflicts, it's unlikely Homo sapiens simply wiped out Neanderthals through warfare. It was more likely a slow process of demographic displacement. If Homo sapiens had slightly larger populations, slightly better tools, a slightly broader diet, or slightly larger social networks, those small advantages would have gradually led to us outcompeting them for resources, or simply outnumbering them over many generations. Imagine two similar species in an ecosystem. If one has just a tiny edge over a long enough time, that edge will allow it to thrive while the other slowly declines. It's a bit like a slow, silent tide. And what about those other species? Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Flores, Indonesia, were tiny. About 3 feet tall, they were likely descended from an earlier Homo erectus population that got stranded on the island. Over time, in an isolated environment with limited resources and no large predators, they evolved to be smaller, a phenomenon called island dwarfism. They were still making stone tools and hunting small elephants. They might have survived until as recently as 50,000 years ago, perhaps even overlapping with our arrival in the region. Their extinction was likely due to a combination of climate change and maybe the arrival of our species. Their isolation, which allowed them to evolve, also made them vulnerable. Homo naledi is another intriguing case. Discovered in a cave system in South Africa, these hominins had a strange mix of primitive and modern features. They had small brains, like much earlier hominins, but hands and feet that were surprisingly modern. The most astonishing thing is their age. They might have been alive as recently as 250,000 years ago, meaning they lived alongside early Homo sapiens in Africa. Their remains were found deep inside a cave, suggesting they might have intentionally deposited their dead there, which is a complex behavior usually associated with bigger-brained hominins like us or Neanderthals. Their story is still unfolding, but it shows how diverse the human family tree was, even relatively recently. So, when we look at the whole picture, there isn't one single silver bullet answer. It wasn't just language, or just tools, or just a bigger brain. It was a combination of many subtle advantages that, when put together, created a powerful synergy. Our cognitive abilities, which allowed for complex language, abstract thought, and rapid innovation, probably played a huge role. Our flexible diet and generalist strategy made us incredibly adaptable. Our larger social networks and cooperative tendencies fostered resilience and cumulative culture. Our demographic edge, even if slight, meant we grew in numbers and spread across the globe. It's not about saying we were superior in every way. Neanderthals were incredibly strong and well adapted to their environment. Homo erectus was successful for an astonishing amount of time. Each species had its strengths. But we Homo sapiens had a particular set of adaptations that proved to be incredibly effective in a world that was constantly throwing new challenges our way. We were the ultimate generalists, the ultimate adapters, the ultimate innovators, and the ultimate networkers. It's a humbling thought, really. We are here not because of one grand triumphant victory, but because of a series of small compounding advantages and maybe a bit of luck. We are the survivors of a long, complex evolutionary story. We are the only branch left on that incredibly bushy human family tree. And understanding why that happened helps us understand a little bit more about who we are and what makes us human. It reminds us that our story is just one of many, and that the path to today was filled with countless others who walked beside us for a time before fading into the deep past.